Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with Dr. Nanette Miner, who is a leadership development strategist and founder of The Training Doctor, a South Carolina-based consulting firm that helps its clients to prepare today for the organizational leaders they will need tomorrow. Welcome, Nanette Miner, to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I'm so excited to have you joining me today.
Thanks, John.
To start things off today, I just want to provide a quick background bio for Nanette and then give her a chance to introduce herself. And then we have some questions prepared, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to talk with Nanette about her experience in relation to coaching and working with organizational leaders to help them maximize their potential. Dr. Nanette Miner is a leadership development strategist and founder of The Training Doctor, a South Carolina-based consulting firm that helps its clients to prepare today for the organizational leadership they will need tomorrow. Clients appreciate Nanette's guidance through relevant, timely, and often challenging questions that stimulate new ways of thinking and working in order to prepare the organizations for the future of work. Her focus on business goals integrated with sound principles of adult learning results in enhanced organizational effectiveness and astounding return on investment. She is a frequent speaker at trade conferences and corporate conventions and an expert guest on the topic of workforce development for Inc. Radio. Her most recent book is Future Proofing Your Organization by Teaching Thinking Skills. As a scholar practitioner, she has authored books on various aspects of business management, marketing, and employee development, and has been published in or quoted by Forbes.com, Huffington Post, Fast Company, the BBC, MBAworld.com, and numerous industry and trade journals. And as a fellow scholar practitioner and consultant, it's a unique pleasure to have the opportunity to talk with you today, Nanette.
Same here, John. I'm excited.
Yeah. Would you mind just doing a little brief introduction of your own?
Oh, I think you pretty much covered it there.
One other thing
sure.
I did want to say that I know you ride a Harley, which I think is super cool. I don't dare because I just don't have balance skills.
Oh.
But
well,
that's awesome.
it's actually the balance part is not hard for me. It's hard because I'm only 5'1", so it's hard to find a Harley that fits me. There's basically only one that fits me. But yes, it's bike week here, so we actually went out for a nice long ride on Saturday, and that was my first ride for this year. So I'm kind of in pain. You know, it takes a while. It's like being on a horse. It takes a while to get used to it again.
Well, what a fun hobby, and probably especially it's necessary to have hobbies in this day and age of COVID quarantining and being able to go out on a motorcycle out into the surrounding areas, I imagine is quite nice.
Yeah, it's great. Yes.
Awesome. Well, welcome again to the podcast. I'm just going to launch into our first question for today, and I look forward to having a discussion. You've been working in the field of professional development and leadership development for nearly 30 years. Overall, what would you say has been working and not working within that area?
Well, more recently working, as you said, almost 30 years. So I like to say to people, I started when, if you wanted a colored overhead, you colored it in with markers the night before your presentation. So technology has advanced so much that, in my opinion, is what's really working now, is that if you aspire to be a leader, you can take charge of your own development, your own career, and take advantage of all the things that are out there. And so many of them are free. Like, well, LinkedIn Learning isn't free, but it's certainly well worth the money because of the
Yeah.
catalog that they have available. YouTube has all sorts of instructional videos from, TEDx to just Google or go to YouTube and ask what is project management, and you could be there for 5 days just reading all or listening to all the experts on project management. So I think what's really working is the ability to curate your own content
Mhm.
and manage and take control of your own career.
Yeah.
What's not working is the traditional way of that leadership development has been done for, well, not that long really, because most people were organically developed, in the 50s, 60s, 70s. So maybe in the last 30 or 40 years, we've actually made that a function where we say, okay, now we're going to develop leaders. But the problem that in my opinion, the problem that's occurs in that process is that generally companies wait until they promote somebody to a leader and then they start to apply leadership development. And I just feel that that's so unfair and stressful on the new leader because now they
Mhm.
have functional responsibilities and somebody's asking them to change their behavior. So it's overwhelming. It's not easy to change behavior. As a fellow trainer and scholar in human resources and OD, you know that, behavior change is the hardest thing to get someone to do. So why would you expect after 20, 30 years on the job, you're going to ask them to change their behavior and they're going to be able to do it? So, what's not working is the traditional way of doing it. So I'm kind of excited about this COVID virus because I think it's going to reset a lot of things in business, and this will be one of those things.
That's so interesting, and it's been my experience as well. And one of the challenges is that you have, well, I'll often talk with leaders about the difference between training and development, right?
Right.
And on the one hand, you want to be proactive about developing future leaders by providing opportunities for development, and both structured, formal and informal types of opportunities.
Right.
But you also don't want to just be trying to shove everyone through some sort of generic leadership development program, because that's not effective at all.
Right.
And so what I've seen is often kind of either extreme. I've seen nothing
Right.
until
Nothing.
they do
Right.
nothing until the person takes on the new role, and then they're completely unprepared for it.
Right.
Or the leader really believes in preparing future leaders, and so they just make every employee go through these different types of, they call them leadership development programs, but they're really, they're not there's no concrete objective of them, um, for employees going through them at the time. Just the possibility at some future date you might need to be tapped for a leadership role. And a lot of employees simply don't want leadership roles.
True.
And so it's just a complete waste of time and money on the part of the organization. So I guess it's no surprise that we probably should steer away from either extreme, right?
Well,
uh,
honestly, I really believe I have a whole philosophy called leadership from day one. And I really do believe we should develop everybody when they come in the door, regardless of whether they will become a leader in the end or not. Because as you said, a lot of people won't want that opportunity. But I can't see there being a downside to teaching everybody to be a better communicator or a better
sure.
team player or a better collaborator. It's just going to, it's the rising tide lifts all boats philosophy. It's just going to make it a better organization, because otherwise it's up to people's individual motivation, and some will be better and some will just coast, and I'd rather not people coasting.
Right, right. And I think you just hit on something that I think is really key, that there's lots of leadership competencies and capabilities that we can start to develop in all of our employees, because they're universally important.
Right.
Working effectively in teams, effective listening and communication skills, like that's going to help everybody,
Everybody. Right.
regardless of whether they end up being a leader or not. And of course, organizations have formal leaders and they have informal leaders, and so
Right.
everyone has the opportunity to influence. And I guess the sticking point is, do you have employees go through those types of programs with the expectation that you're going to try to force feed people who have no interest or desire whatsoever in, to be a future leader, to take on formal roles, right?
Oh, yes, I agree with you on that. Right.
Yeah, yeah, and I see that happen often, actually. And but on the other extreme, you see them doing nothing, and then
Yeah, that's the extreme I always see. Yeah.
yeah, and then people are just completely unprepared.
There should be like
And
an exit strategy for the people that get forced into it, that may like, well, let me try it. You should say to them, okay, but
it,
like we took a chance on you and said in 90 days, we'll decide if you stay with us. You can say to us in 90 days, this is not for me. I've had a couple of, in my past, when I was an employee, I've had a couple of managers who actually did that too, who got
mhm.
promoted. And then within 3 or 4 months said, just, I like doing the works, forget it. I don't want to be the manager.
Yeah, awesome. It's so interesting to think about that dynamic and how it's different, across different types of organizations.
Yeah.
But I think for sure, what's important is that the organizations of tomorrow that are going to effectively innovate and stay competitive, they're going to need to have cross-functional teams that are working
Yes.
effectively. They're going to need people with these competencies and capabilities.
Yes.
And you're going to see, we already have seen a flattening of organizational structures,
Right.
but that's only going to continue in more latticed organizations and integrated organizations. And so there's just so much opportunity to prepare people for that, because frankly, that's not what most people know or what they've seen in the past.
Right. That's not what we've been doing for the last 20 years. I mean, one of my
Exactly.
biggest soapboxes is we train everybody in a silo. So if you enter an organization, say in finance, and you're lucky enough that we give you professional development, it'll probably only be in finance. And so we're not
Right.
making business leaders. That's my big bugaboo, is we're not making business leaders. There's a whole generation of folks who really don't know how business works because we've trained them to be specialists for the last 20 years.
Yeah, yeah. And so often I'll have this discussion with leaders. Now, obviously, we need experts. You need experts that can go a mile deep, especially when you're dealing with technical fields. You can't do it without having experts, but you need generalists, and you need people
Right.
that are integrators and systems thinkers and
Exactly.
can pull everything together. And if everything is
Exactly.
if it's only siloed into all these different areas of experts, then nobody can communicate with each other effectively, and then you just have so many missed opportunities. And so much of the innovation that happens within organizations is through the cross pollination
That is
of
true.
ideas, right? And
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
not just from experts within their own specific area.
I think too that it contributes to a lot of that infighting we hear in organizations. Sales doesn't like marketing, and marketing doesn't like operations and research. Or,
Hmm.
I think a lot of that's just because we don't know what those other departments do. It's just that's a natural human reaction to go, oh, I don't like them, but basically it's just because I don't understand them, so I'll keep them at an arm's length. So part of my philosophy is, in addition to just giving people those basic skills that can't not hurt if if they develop them, but also
Hmm.
get some kind of rotational methodology going so people
Yeah.
understand what the departments around them do. I mean, so many people don't understand where their work comes from, and then where does it go after they're done with it, and what the
Yes.
interdependencies are and what the bottlenecks are. I mean, just that alone would make companies' processes so much better if they just understood that.
I absolutely agree. That's so important, and that's one of the most common problems I see in organizations that I work with.
Yeah.
So you posed the question when we were thinking about questions in advance, about economic stress. Companies tend to eliminate training in times of economic stress, and that's
Sure do.
certainly been the case throughout my career. I've seen it happen repeatedly.
Mhm.
So you had the recessions in the early 90s, 9/11 in the early 2000s. You had the financial meltdown and the Great Recession in 2008, 2009. And now we're dealing with COVID issues, and how that's transforming the workplace and moving to more virtual work, and just the economic um, conditions
Impacts.
related to that. Yeah. Um, so clearly, it's important for people, as the workplace is shifting and moving more virtual. It's important for people to upskill and to be ready for this transition. Um, but that's happening simultaneously while companies are dealing with budget cuts, just trying to keep the doors open, trying to keep people employed. And so, what can companies do? What can individuals do within this context where they need to continue to develop, but resources may be constrained?
No resources, right? Well, I think in terms of individuals, they can do what I suggested earlier. Take the reins, especially now. And I mean, this is a very generalized statement, so I apologize if I offend anybody, but especially now we have more free time, right? In theory, because we're not commuting to our jobs. So if you could just spend 20 or 30 minutes a day going, this week I'm going to concentrate on, giving feedback, or what is the difference between constructive and critical feedback? And I'm just going to absorb that for 20 or 30 minutes every day. Just take control of that yourself. It'll make your work life easier. And I do believe it'll make you stand out as leadership potential, because people will see these extra skills. In terms of what can organizations do, people may not like this either, but I really think we have to hire a new role. I mean, it does exist in organizations in one capacity, but I really think we need like coaches throughout the organization. Again, not for just the people we already deemed in the leadership hypo group, but just like have those coaches attending meetings, because meetings are all online now. And I've honestly, in my past anyway, never seen an online meeting that accomplished as much as an in-person meeting. So if you have the normal departmental manager or whomever runs that meetings running them online, I haven't, this is just a theory. I haven't proven this in any way, but I just feel like there's going to be a breakdown where people are not as effective in those meetings. And as you probably know, I mean, everybody's using Zoom now, so there's the opportunity to either talk all over one another, or let's have everybody muted so that we're not. And so the give and take is not, it's great that we have the visuals. That helps a lot, because that wasn't an option just a few years ago. But I do think there's opportunity to just shut people down as well, in the under the definition of being efficient. So
Yeah.
I feel like we need coaches attending all these kinds of meetings who can kind of offer feedback or moderate the process for us, so it's not the manager's job to also run the meeting and get the content out there. I think coaches at every level, where you could just call somebody up afterwards and go, hey, let's talk for 10 minutes about how I saw you interacting in this meeting. I want to give you a few pointers. I just think coaches have to be much more pervasive throughout the organization. I wrote an article probably 8 or 10 years ago now, where I suggested that we needed a two-manager model.
Mm,
And I mean, if companies could afford that, to me, that would be ideal, because I really think most managers get promoted, most leaders get promoted because they were technically good at what they do, right?
right.
We kind of alluded to that earlier. So now you've got a technically great person, but not necessarily a technically good manager. But and
Hmm.
to my earlier point, why would you ask them to change their behavior? So why don't we just make that a dual role, where you have somebody who's in charge of managing the function and the projects and the deliverables, and then you have another equal peer who's in charge of keeping the department humming, you know, ironing out discrepancies and helping with communication and making people, look to the future and where do you want to go next and how can we develop you? Because that's a lot to ask of one manager. I mean, I do feel in the last, since probably the 80s, especially when we took away secretaries, which is not a word half people even know what the definition of that is anymore. But I feel like we've just put more and more and more on managers and individuals to produce, and it's just not physically possible to cover all the bases. And I do think then, when push comes to shove, if you're the manager, you're going to default to covering the functional bases, because that's what you
Right.
get paid to do.
So the people management, the development, the strategic stuff, that often gets pushed to the side,
Yeah.
just because they're struggling to just get all those functional pieces done day in and day out. They have all these deadlines, and so they're trying to meet the urgent
Right.
requirements, and they just don't
Right.
have time for the other stuff.
Right.
I love the idea about having coaches embedded, and as you were describing that, I was just thinking about my own personal practice. Um, I found that I'd never thought about it before until you described it that way. But whenever I get off of an important call, I always have people that I will immediately do a post-call debrief with, and I'll call them up and I'll say, "Hey, how did that go? What went well? What didn't? What did I come across the way I was intending?" And we just have that conversation, and it's
The
super
call
helpful.
after the call.
The call
Yeah.
after the call is so
Yeah.
important,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure how many people do that, but it's something I've just naturally done over time, and it helps me so much. And
But
I
you're
think,
proactive.
yeah,
Yeah.
and perhaps I'm in a luxurious position. we're in a different kind of situation because we're scholar practitioners, and I'm a faculty member at the university on one hand with lots of autonomy and flexibility, and then I do consulting stuff on the other hand, and I have lots of like complete autonomy and flexibility. So I mean, I acknowledge that I enjoy much more flexibility than the average person. And that's really to your point, is that the average manager doesn't have that. Like they're just so constantly going from one thing to the next. They don't have time for debrief. And
I remember being in I wasn't in a meeting, it was virtual. It was actually only on the phone with a head of HR or something. I mean, it was a very high level person in the organization that I was working with, and she could only talk to me as she was walking between meetings. That was the only time in the day I could get a hold of her. And I was like, this is not effective. Like, how will she even remember what we talked about? She just left one meeting with her head full of stuff, and she's going into another meeting where she's already going to forget that meeting and my phone call. Yeah, I just think we need another role.
Yeah.
Or we could bring back secretaries, because that would help a lot too.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, and the other piece that you alluded to a few minutes ago is just in this world of virtual meetings, Zoom, Teams, whatever people are using, is just the idea of Zoom fatigue, right?
Yes.
Like on the one hand, it's nice we have this technology, and it's nice that we can still interact. And you already pointed out some of the problems though with virtual meetings, in terms of people not being able to necessarily, you don't have the same dynamic, so you don't have the same give and take.
Right.
But there's already research showing the effect of Zoom fatigue, and it's kind of interesting to me because it actually takes more out of you to go sit in front of your computer for a Zoom meeting than it would take for you to be in an in-person meeting.
Yes.
For a variety of reasons. And now we're finding ourselves in meeting after meeting after meeting. Where you might spend 6 hours straight going from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, and that's just mentally exhausting. And the role, the impact that has on individuals, leaders, and line workers is tremendous, I think. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops over time.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a fast backlash on that. I just saw somebody speaking the other day, and they said, why is every meeting Zoom now? Like before, it used to be a phone call, and now it's a Zoom meeting for no reason. We could still accomplish it in the phone call. It's even like, can I just get off the camera, please?
Yeah, or email still works, right? There's a lot of things that you can just accomplish through a quick email. And now I find that people are like, let's even if it's for 5 minutes, let's jump on a Zoom meeting, instead of just shooting an email. I'm like, or like you said, a phone call. Either way, sometimes that's just better. So
my director of operations and I are about 600 miles apart, and so we're on Skype all day long. But we will ask permissions, like, "May I call you? Is it okay if I interrupt you for 10 or 15 minutes because we're head down, we're doing work?" And you're right; those meetings can be so disruptive. Or sometimes we have this code where we go ding. It's like I'm ringing the doorbell, like, ding, can I interrupt you? And if the other person doesn't answer, we don't interrupt them. So we know we I guess that's a working rapport where we trust the other person is not purposely ignoring us. There's a good reason they're ignoring us.
Right. Yeah, that's great.
But my point is, we reserve the important stuff for, like, I have to talk this thing through with you, and I only need 5 minutes. Is that okay? But we still ask permission first. We don't just assume you're going to be willing to get on camera with me or whatever.
Yep. One more quick question, and we'll wrap things up for today. This is, perhaps the most important question of all. If you had to just pick one skill that every leader in business should master, well, really every leader, regardless of whether it's business or whatever organizational context, one skill that every leader should master, what would it be and why?
Well, I think we've already alluded to that too, or covered it. It is, I mean, my mindset is business. And so that would be a generalist, which I guess is not one skill because that's a myriad of skills. But when I think leader, I think above a managerial level. I think somebody who's steering the ship, not somebody who's executing. So, a leader is more like the captain of the ship. They're not the person who's actually in the wheelhouse or rowing it, or, the navigator. They're overseeing all those people. So when I say leader, that's kind of the image that I have.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we were talking about earlier, where we've put people in silos for so long, and we have these we don't understand where the work comes from or where it goes to or what our our deliverables really do in the end. There's no way you're going to run a meeting. I mean, excuse me, there's no way you're going to run a business if you don't understand that. So I think if you truly aspire to be not necessarily the CEO, but somebody, above a managerial level, you really have to immerse yourself in business, which again, you can do easily. Like one of the things I love to do is listen to business podcasts, which, I mean, I'm just a geek. My daughter the other day said, "Do you have any magazines? I'm trying to make a collage." And I'm like, "Would you like Inc. or Harvard Business Review?" Because that's like the only magazines I have. But, when I'm walking my dog, I'm listening to business podcasts, and they just, to me, they're energizing. I'm the notes app in my phone is so full of notes. It's unbelievable, because as I'm walking, I'll pause the podcast and then I'll record myself and know, like, that's a good idea. I could write an article on that. I should, look that term up. I don't know what that means. Like, I'm just constantly immersing myself in business. And I think if you really want to be a leader, you've got to do that as well. It doesn't, what's great now is you don't have to go get degrees and all this stuff, because they're out there. Like one of the resources that I love, I didn't mention earlier, is edX, which is
Yeah.
the MOOC level of going to college, which you can do completely free, or you can choose to pay a really nominal fee and get a certification at the end as well. So like a few years ago, I was thinking about getting my PMP, my project management professional
Yeah.
designation. And the more I looked into it, the more I thought, that's really not going to further my career. It's nice to have the credential, but it doesn't really align with what I do. So I went and got a certificate in project management from the University of Rochester. So at least I understand more about the topic, but I didn't have to go through all the hoop jumping that the PMP requires. So, I mean, there's so much that a person could do independently to become more knowledgeable about business in general, even if you don't leave your own organization. I would say
Yeah.
another thing that people can do, which I'm a big proponent of, and I don't know how this is going to work post COVID, but get involved in volunteer organizations too, because I really think it's important
Yeah.
to understand your community, to make relationships outside of your own business. And like, especially for younger people who are aspiring someday to be a manager, I always say, you're going to be the vice president of marketing at the local nonprofit way earlier than you're going to be the vice president of marketing at your company. So, get out there and get that responsibility. You'll learn so much about project management and communication and meeting deadlines and, working with other organizations. I mean, you'll just get so much business experience by volunteering. It's unbelievable.
That's a wonderful tip. And our communities need that. There are
Yes.
so many, where I'm at, we're one of the highest nonprofit per capita locations in the country. And there's just a lot of big-hearted people that want to do good, and they don't always have the skills to go along with their intentions. And so there's plenty of opportunities for people to get involved in very meaningful roles in the
Right.
nonprofit sector. And I imagine that's the case in many other locations. So that's a great way to develop your skills. And one of the things, as you were describing that most important skill set, the generalist
Mhm.
skill, that someone would need to have. In my mind, the way I think about it is in terms of integration, synthesis, and systems thinking. So
Mhm.
to be a systems thinker, I have to know how everything interacts,
Exactly.
right? And I can still be an expert in certain pieces of it, but I don't need to be an expert in everything. But I need to understand enough to know the interrelationships, the feedback loops, and understanding how everything interacts. That
And
requires
enough to know to ask the right questions,
exactly,
because that's
yeah,
another leadership skill. I don't have to have the answers. I just have to ask the right questions.
exactly. And I think the organizations of tomorrow, as we try to forecast the needs for the future of work, I think it has to come back to integrative, synthesizing, systems thinking types of mentalities, not just for CEOs. I mean, that's always been the case for C-suite executives, but they have to be able to think at that level to be effective. But I think that skill set's being pushed down, the necessities being pushed down to lower levels. And flattening hierarchies is causing that in part as well. And
Right.
we just need people that can get outside of their own expertise.
Yes.
And it behooves every organization to invest in that.
Mhm.
Now in the COVID context, where we have like tremendous unemployment and all of this, it's a little different. But prior to coronavirus, we had about the lowest unemployment rate that we'd
Right.
seen and that's certainly the case here in Utah. I mean, we had unemployment rates that were too low. That meant employers couldn't get
Right.
a good pool of candidates for a position, particularly for technical positions, highly skilled and advanced types of positions. And so my point is, we're in like a hyper competitive labor market pre-COVID, and
Mm-hmm.
eventually we'll get back to that point. It may take a little while, but when we're in that situation, we don't have the luxury of just like inserting new experts every time we need to do something, right? We have to
Right.
upskill, we have to retrain, we have to
Right.
think long term in terms of our human capital, in a way that we can leverage what our people can do and how we can build that capacity. And
Right.
if we don't take that approach, organizations are going to be hurting when we get back to a hyper competitive labor market situation.
But I hope that they learned their lesson from this, because there were things that they could have done that they just shunned for whatever reason. And I get there's pressure of saying I constantly have to, recruit and retain, because that's the market that we're in. But if you developed people from the minute they walked in the door, you'd have a succession plan. I just
Yeah,
know so many organizations where a position was just left vacant for,
yeah,
almost a year, because they were they were blindsided when the person decided to leave, and then they had
yeah,
no plan B. And then they had to go looking for the right person. But like you said, when the market is tight, you're not really looking for the right person, you're bribing them to come from somewhere else. There's really no leverage left. So again, it's why I really believe companies have to develop people from within, whether they want to be a manager or not. At least you've got people with capabilities that could pitch in a pinch. Pitch in a pinch. There we go.
yeah. Awesome. Well, Nanette, thank you again for joining us. I think we're out of time for today, but it's been a pleasure talking with you, and I hope to have you back in the future,
Oh, that'd be great.
to chat about related issues. And I think there's so much depth here in what we've been discussing that a half
Yeah,
hour just simply doesn't allow
true.
for a full examination of. But I hope to have you back. And thanks again for joining us. And I encourage all of the HCI podcast listenership to go look up Nanette and the Training Doctor, and learn a little bit more about what her organization is doing and if it might be a good fit for what you need help with.
Thank you.
So thank you and have a great week.
Thanks, John.
Bye bye.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.